Today I decided to give you guys a review of Saw X. It's the 10th installment into the franchise, and it's directed by Kevin Greutert, who directed one of the best Saw sequels, Saw 6, and funnily enough, one of the worst Saw sequels with the final chapter. But this new film, thankfully, is as good as the former, as opposed to the latter. So what are my overall thoughts on the film? Well, first let's start with a general story. The film once again stars Tobin Bell as Jigsaw. This time, it takes place between the first and second film, and he's looking for a cure for his cancer diagnosis. John seeks the help of a doctor who's willing to give experimental medicine to him in a last-ditch effort to cure his cancer. John undergoes this experimental procedure, but unfortunately, it turns out the whole thing was a big ruse. The main doctor, as well as her associates, are all con artists, and thus Jigsaw kidnaps them, puts them through a test so they can potentially become better people, and John's sick, twisted games begin once again. The traps this time around are very brutal. They must put themselves through grueling torture and test their limits if they are to survive and be released by Jigsaw. Jigsaw's not alone this time. Amanda joins him in his quest to teach these people a moral lesson. And that's the basic premise of the film. So now I'll get into the positives of the movie. And first and foremost, the main positive is Jigsaw himself, John Kramer, played once again by Tobin Bell. It's great to see him back in the role, and he hasn't really played Jigsaw since 2017's, well, Jigsaw. He's great as always, and he really does bring his A-game here. It's also really good to see Shawnee Smith back as Amanda, and it's cool to see them return again in this awesome series. Another positive has to be the gore effects. They are really top-notch this time around. Once again, they bring their A-game, and this truly is one of the most stomach-churning of the franchise. I'm surprised it's actually got an R rating. I remember seeing one scene in the movie and thinking to myself, how is this not NC-17? Definitely much better gore than Spiral, the previous entry, and Jigsaw, as well as Saw 3D. This is right on par with, I'd say, 1, 2, and 6, as far as the gore goes. Another positive is the story itself. The basic premise that I mentioned in the story section of the video is pretty much revealed in the trailer. I'll try to avoid spoilers for the most part, but basically the story is simple, to the point, and really does give that feel of the first 3 Saw movies that kind of was lost with some of the latter sequels. It feels like a Saw film, it looks like a Saw film, and the story is the best you've ever seen, probably since the original. And the acting is actually top-notch. The film also does something that I'm actually surprised about, and that's made me care about Jigsaw and Amanda. I always looked at them as psychopaths in the previous film, who had their hardships, but ultimately they're bad people. Whereas this movie, you kind of feel for them at times, and they feel more human than they did in any of the other Saw films, even in the original ones. Last positive, I have to say that the film overall looks like it has a pretty good budget. Some of the Saw films look kind of cheap, but this one looks like they upped the ante. It's not super expensive, but they use their budget well, and it actually does look like a better polished film than any of the other Saw films. It looks absolutely top-notch, and I was actually rather impressed by that. I'm going to get into some of the mixed aspects. One is the age of the characters. Shawnee Smith returns as Amanda, and she looks 15 years older than she did in the last film, probably because she is. And it kind of works for John Kramer, played by Tobin Bell, because he does have cancer, so it would make sense that he would look older than he is. But there's really no excuse for Shawnee. They just kind of throw a bad wig on her, and they pretty much call it a day. And ultimately, I just don't feel that they did a great job making her look younger. She looked, relatively young in the first few movies. She looked like someone who's in her 30s. Now she looks like a woman who's in her late 40s. Again, that's not bad, and I probably prefer that over just a bunch of CGI or digital de-aging. But they could have, at least given her the same hairstyle as 1 and 2, but instead they just kind of go for this weird wig. And like I said, call it a day. Other than that, though, the only other negative I have is there's a few plot holes. For one, the doctors who betray John leave a bunch of evidence behind after they pull off their ruse. Pretty much able to find them pretty easily because of that. You think if these people have been scamming people for years, they cover their tracks a little bit better. Hell, they go through an elaborate ruse just to get him to the place to fake the surgery. And now they're just going to leave behind evidence that pretty much gives it away and has them find him literally the next day. It just seemed a little bit flimsy to get the traps going. Don't get me wrong, you want to see these people suffer, and you do want to see them get their comeuppance. But he could have, maybe did a little more digging and a little more detective work to actually find them, as opposed to just finding some random evidence they left behind that pretty much gave away exactly who they were, what they did, and where to find them. And lastly, moving on to my negatives of the film. The only negative I have is that there's really nowhere you can go with a sequel. and this pretty much has to be it. I mean, you could make another movie like Spiral with like a copycat killer, but there's really nothing, no more open ends to go, and this pretty much completely wraps things up. You could argue, like I said, that's another spin-off killer, or maybe Hoffman will come back in some way, but as it stands, it's pretty much one and done, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't know, I kind of wanted them maybe like a little teaser for a future film, because that's what these films are kind of known for, is setting up other films, but we don't really get much here. But that's really just a small gripe. I do like that we actually got this film. All in all, I very much enjoyed Saw X, and I'm going to give Saw X an 8 out of 10. It's almost a 9, but it's not quite there. As far as where I'd rank the movie, I'd probably say it's on par with the first one. I don't know if I like it more, and I like it more than all the Saw sequels. It is fantastic. I highly recommend it. So that's my review. I do thank you all for watching. As of late, I actually picked up the Saw video game for PS3 and been playing that. It's actually pretty damn fun. It's a little clunky, but this is actually an underrated gem that I wish I'd played back in the day. There's also a sequel called Saw 2 Flesh and Blood that I got to check out as well. So if you want a fun Saw experience that's not the movies, check this game out. All in all, I thank you all for watching. I'd like to know your opinions on the film down below, and peace out.